Welcome everyone to this. This is Brother Doug. I'm with my brothers and sisters from the Wakened by Yahuwah Assembly and Yahuwah Almighty and Yahushua Messiah, and we are also with our brother John, who is great enough to allow us to be on his Zoom room tonight. So thank you very much, John, and thank you Yeshai and Brother Tobiah for being with us also. We're gonna be going into a study showing why people are being misled not to keep the law. Okay, so we're going to be going into studies that hopefully there's some Christians that will be viewing this tonight, because this will definitely be something they would need to watch. Hopefully open their eyes to the truth of the truth of Yahuwah's scriptures, his word, which is his son Yahushua. So this is definitely an informative study for any Christian that might be watching or listening in. So I'm going to start us off with John chapter 3, verse 36, and I'll show you what has happened and why a lot of times this is mistranslated and misinterpreted. So what has happened is Christianity has misinterpreted the word belief as just mere, you believe something's real. That's whenever you see the word believe in the Bible, most Christians would just think, oh, that just means believe, There's no action required from it. No fruits come from it. It's just belief by itself. So we're going to show you, though, in the second word here, how if it was translated, in my opinion, correctly, you would get a whole different meaning to this verse. So first we're going to read it in the King James, where it says, he that believes on the Son, John chapter 3, verse 36, has everlasting life, and he that believes not the Son shall not see the life, but the wrath of Yahuwah abides on him. What's interesting here is that the second word that they're translating the same as the first word are two completely different Greek words. The first word, G4100, means mere belief, to think something's true, to be persuaded. If you go to the second word, they translate the same in English, which is kind of weird in my opinion, why they would translate two different words as the same word in English. But anyway, this one is G544, apatheo, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, to not allow oneself to be persuaded, to refuse withhold belief, to refuse belief and obedience. So this word can be belief, but it's more including belief plus obedience, and that's why in the Aramaic, I believe that's why it's translated this word as disobey. Okay, so the Aramaic Peshitta manuscript of the New Testament says, whoever is trusting in the Son, I like how it says trusting, in my opinion, has the eternal life, and whoever disobeys the Son shall not see the life, but the anger of Yahuwah shall abide upon him. So obedience is showing it is required in the belief. When you believe in something, you trust in something, there's an action that follows. So
let me add something too, Doug, because the Hebrew language is a very action-based language. All the verbs are action-based. They're not like our English will just use words like to be, or words that don't really mean you're doing anything. Believe, it's just some ethereal thought, but Hebrew's not like that. And that word that was translated as belief is actually trust and obey. It's not just think about it. It's trust him and obey him. And that's all I wanted to add.
Okay, yep, and just for all of our brothers and sisters, I see we got a new person in here that just came in here for the study. So Ray Standing Tall, if you got something to add, just put up your hand. I see Brother Tobiah has a hand raised, so let's go to let's unmute Ray Standing Tall, or if you can unmute yourself. I see you might have something to add.
In Romans 10, the famous, if you will confess Messiah with your mouth, that word confess is homologeo, which is nothing like confess in the sense that we would think what confessions mean. That means to have the same words. So if you make your words identical to the words of Messiah, then you are confessing Messiah. That's another example of this English difficulty. The Greek language is actually very precise, but the way we translate a lot of these words doesn't make sense. For instance, in the Greek, if you have an A at the beginning of a word, it means the opposite of whatever that word means typically. So an A is a negation added at the front as a prefix to flip the meaning of a word to the opposite of what it would have meant without the A on it. And there's other instances of usages of prefixes and suffixes to change words. But unfortunately, because English is a very nebulous language, and like Sister said, Hebrew is very object and action oriented, very much about what your five senses can smell, see, touch, or taste. And unfortunately, we have a language that comes from a mixture of Latin, German, and Gaelic. And it's not only is it packed full of borrowed words from lots of different languages, but a lot of words were made up just specifically for the King James Bible when it was written, because they literally didn't know what these words meant. Like, for instance, baptizo, they just literally transliterated baptized because they didn't know what it meant. And of course, baptizo actually means to take a garment and to dye it a color, but that's turned into, dunk people in water, even though it's actually a transliterated word. For instance, the word wicked, they had to figure out how to express what wickedness was, because when you make a candle, you twist the wick. So wickedness is to twist the word, and that was why they made the word wicked to express those ideas. And other words like fulfill, to fill to its fullness, like when it says that Christ fulfilled the law, it means he brought it to its fullness. It doesn't mean that he brought it to an end. It means it's at its fullness in him and through what he does. So yeah, there's there's so much trouble people get into when they just don't break out that Strong's Concordance and start digging, or the Thayer's Lexicon. I mean, that's what they're there for. Put them to use.
Yep, definitely agree with you there. We're actually going to get into that, so that's great you actually brought the Matthew 5 thing up, because that's actually Sister Shoshana is actually going to read that for us now and show you that even fulfill is not really the correct word. According to Romans 15:19, the same exact Greek word was being used, and they translated correctly in that verse, but mistranslated in Matthew 5:17. So I'll let my sister Shoshana continue here.
Okay.
To make a comment real quick on where we came from, about the belief and about action, following the belief that what you're talking about there in the translation. James 2:22 says, "Do you see that belief? The belief was working with his works, and by the works the belief was perfected." Like back along the lines of what we're saying, belief without works is dead. And I think that applies to where you're talking about the translation not really bearing witness of in the verse that you reflected on originally, Brother Doug.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And James, and just like what our sister shared, that in the Hebrew it's a fuller meaning of the word belief. It's only belief because it has evidence of the action being taken on behalf of the belief. And that's what it's saying here in James 2:22. Do you see that belief was working with the works, and by the works the belief was perfected? Bringing the fullness of the meaning in the Hebrew of that word.
Faith without works is dead.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't. It has the beginnings of what makes what is belief, but it's not actually. The ingredients aren't actually there, because for it to truly be belief, we have to be willing to act on it.
Right. It's how you live your life, which is why Yahuwah always says he judges a person by their work. Even though we don't believe in a works-based faith, because it is a free gift of salvation, but that word belief is not just some ethereal think about it. It is action-based.
Yeah.
It's more correctly, maybe could be considered the evidence of a belief.
The evidence, yes.
The proof of belief, that which, we can say we believe it, but if we don't get up off the couch and go take action on it, do we really believe it?
No, it's
No.
the way you live your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we ready for Matthew 5:17?
Yep. Go ahead, sis.
Okay. Do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the Nevi'im, the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fully proclaim it. Fully proclaim it. And this is, I think, according to the Greek translation you have, Doug.
The original Greek New Testament actually translates the same Greek word plero as fully proclaim or preach the glad tidings, the Basorah.
Right.
So the funny thing is they did it correctly in one verse in Romans 15:19, but then they decide, no, we're not going to translate it as preached again. We're going to translate it as fulfill. So in my opinion, I think it was done on purpose, because there's a doctrine in Christianity known as we don't have to keep or obey or observe the Torah because the Messiah did it for us. He fulfilled the law for us. So I believe it was completely intentional by the translators. That's just my opinion. I believe it's completely intentional. Why they didn't translate it both times as preached or fully preached or fully proclaimed as it is in Romans 15:19.
And when you go on to read the next few verses, it shows that it's works-based here. It says, for truly I say to you, until the heavens and earth pass away, one yod or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be fulfilled. So whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens.
Yeah, I see. I think we got two people or maybe I didn't lower their hands from before. So just let me know, guys, if you have anything to add. I just lowered those hands from before because I think they were still up and I didn't lower them. So I see Ray. Yep, go ahead.
This is common practice among rabbis, and of course Yeshua is a rabbi. So he's teaching Haggadah, which is where he is explaining not only the halakha, which is walk, but the Haggadah, which is the deeper meaning in an explanation to his disciples on why they walk as they do. Not only how to walk it, but why they walk it. And you'll see him doing that as he's teaching in parables to the masses and to his disciples. He's giving them the Haggadah, which is the further explanation of the prophets and the law, where he gives them the stories and says, well, here's the story of a man who had 3 servants. Here's a story of a man of 3 men who only the last of them was a good Samaritan. Only he was the one who actually who really actually cared about his neighbor. Even the first 2 were wholly holy men, they still actually did not fulfill the task of caring about their neighbor because they were more interested in their own holiness or their own cleanliness. So what he's doing in fulfilling that is precisely what any rabbi at the time would have been doing with his disciples, teaching them not only what the law says, but why they should live according to what the law says, and the deeper understandings of it.
Yeah, right on. Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So pretty much that's what we pretty much wanted to talk about with Matthew 5:17 was the word plero there, which you can also find in Romans 15:19, and just as Ray Singing Tall just said, that basically he was explaining it further why they basically walk as they walk, why they walk in righteousness, why not just how, to the apostles he was speaking, but why, the deeper meaning of the Torah. So let's see, Sister Sadie, if you could possibly read Romans chapter 8 verse 1.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna read it. Why do you want it? Okay, here I am. Okay. Hello. Where'd you guys go?
We're here.
Hello? Oh, okay. It's going around in the circles. Hang on one second. Okay. And I'm going to read it out of the scriptures. And so you said Romans 8:1, correct? It says, there is not then now no condemnation to those who are in Messiah, Yahushua, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Ruach.
Okay. Yeah. And so, as Sister Sadie just read, so that's how it should be reading. In most of the Bibles, you'll have it somewhat like that, but then these modern Bibles, like the New International Version, ESV, and some of these very modern, watered-down Bibles will actually use a manuscript that's known as the Codex Sinaiticus that completely omits the second part of that verse. So in Christianity, they would teach it as, let me try to put it in shared screen here to try to explain this, why you could get why it makes a difference if you don't have that second part of the verse. Because they would teach it as, okay, there's no condemnation that those that are in Messiah Yahusha, period. They would teach it as, oh, there's no condemnation. You're a believer in the Messiah. Oh, you're done. Don't worry about how you walk. Don't worry about obeying the law. There's no condemnation to you, so you're fine. See, it's very important, and my dad always taught me this. He's like, you take away one word, it will change. What happens when you take away half a verse? It's a completely new doctrine. It's completely new Basorah. It's a false Basorah, a false GladTidings, a false glad news that Paul warns us about in Galatians. So this is a big problem, and a lot of the modern Bibles will have it where it's only half of the verses there. It stops where it says there's no condemnation for those that are in Messiah Yahusha, period, and it'll just stop there. The ESV has it read like that. I'm pretty sure the NASB has it like that. The God's Word translation has it like that. I mean, think about any modern translation. The majority of them probably have it like that. Unless you have a modern translation that's similar to the King James, like the Jubilee Bible or the ASV 2014.
The Hallelujah scriptures reads like this. There is then now no condemnation to those who are in Messiah Yahusha, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Ruach.
Yep. That's how it should read. I think we see Ray wanted, I think, to say something. Go ahead.
What we're seeing is people changing something that's pretty plain and common sense into something that becomes mystical and magical, because the mystical and the magical is what they're selling. Because it says plainly that if you do not walk according to the flesh, then you must be walking according to the Ruach. And to walk according to the Ruach is to walk according to the instructions given to Moses. Because God spoke with Moses mouth to mouth, putting his Ruach right into his mouth, and then Moses told it to Aaron, and then Aaron said it to everybody else. So anyone would have understood that at the time. The flesh is the enemy of God. If you do what your flesh desires, then you are doing what God does not want you to do. You know, that's kind of the point. So they turned a simple statement of, if you disobey your flesh, then you're probably obeying God, which means there's no condemnation because you're not doing anything wrong. It's like it says that, I can't remember which scripture it says, there is no, it's like there is no sin, no, what is it? There's no law against doing what's right, or something like that. It's in the New Testament, where it says basically there is no law against doing what is proper, or doing what is basically insinuating that as long as there's no law against it, it is something good and you can do it, because everything about the law is making war on the flesh. So here, you know, the writer has basically just made a statement that everybody should have known already, which is, if you're obeying the law, then there's no condemnation. And they've turned it into, if you are whatever it means to be believing in the Messiah, whatever that means, whoever he is, then you are magically shielded from all trouble that could come from you doing whatever you want to do. And it's absolute insanity, but that's what they sell.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any magic shields.
No.
None of this.
We don't believe in magic. Magic is of the enemy. All that sorcery stuff. So let's see here. So that was Romans chapter 8:1, which Sister Sadie brought up, and that was great stuff that that Ray brought up too. Yeah, pretty much you change half a verse, you change the whole meaning of that verse. You take that half a verse out.
Right.
So Sister Shoshana, if you could possibly read Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9.
Sure can. I'm going to start with verse 8. For if Yahusha established them in rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Yahuwah. In other words, to keep the Sabbath. We still keep the Sabbath today. There remains a Sabbath keeping of rest. Every week.
Yeah. And see, this is a big kind of like a little change here, little change there. They put arrest, and unless you know the Greek language, you won't get it. In verse 9, it will just say arrest in the King James, and in the older Bibles, it will not talk about keeping the Sabbath. Unless you understand that word rest is referring to the Sabbath day. The Greek word there for rest actually refers to the Sabbath in Hebrews 4:9. Funny enough, in the Septuagint, it's the same Greek word when it's referring to the Sabbath in the Old Testament of the Septuagint. Sabbatismos. Okay? Keeping Sabbath. So the number one definition of this word. They should have just translated as keeping the Sabbath. But, of course, they translate as rest because, Sunday keeping. They don't want people to think, oh, I'm supposed to be keeping the Sabbath. I'm not supposed to be, going to church on this first day of the week, So they purposely vaguely translated as rest in English. But if I'm not mistaken, this Sabbatismos you'll find all over where it's talking about the Sabbath in the Septuagint. It'll be the same exact word.
Doug?
Yeah.
And I might remind the people again about Rome's challenge, Cardinal Gibbons, what he states in 1892. You look it up. You can go from Genesis or Bereshit all the way to Revelation, and nowhere will you find where it changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday.
No, the Catholic Church did that, and they're proud of
And
it.
they're proud of it. Exactly.
Yeah, that was great you brought that up, Brother Dennis. Let me see here. I see Ray has his hand raised again, so let me unmute him.
Thank you so much for putting up with me. I appreciate it. Whenever I'm introducing someone to the concept of the Sabbath, I don't even bother debating the New Testament with them. I just send them straight to Isaiah 66:22 and 23, where he says, "For in the world that is to come, where your seed will last before me forever, all flesh will come to worship before me on the Sabbath and the new moons." That's obviously a prophecy of the world to come. And whether people like the idea of it or not, when the world to come gets here, they're going to be doing it. So there's no point, at least in my mind, in trying to debate the Sabbath on a Sunday, because it clearly would have never been the Sunday in the eyes of Isaiah.
Good point.
Yeah, great point. And just for listeners that are interested, there's something that the Masoretic text actually leaves out, according to the Septuagint, in what Ray just brought up. In verse 23, it actually doesn't just talk about all flesh coming to worship before him. It says, in Jerusalem. So you're going to have, the people left over, that it talks about in Zechariah 14 coming up, celebrating Feast of Tabernacles. If not, there's something bad's going to happen to the Gentiles. Let's just put it that way. And according to the Septuagint of Zechariah 14, it's not just no rain, no latter rain. It actually talks about that they would be destroyed, whoever's left over of the armies that went up against Jerusalem. So, Ray, I think Brother Tobiah, were you first? Or let's see here. Yeah, go ahead, Brother Tobiah. For some reason, I can't unmute you. You're going to have to do it on your own, I think.
I don't have my hand up, so.
Oh, my bad. I must have forgot to put it down from last time. My bad.
No, on my screen, my hand's not up, so I don't know what's up. But right on.
All right. Ray, go ahead.
Well, I'll talk your ear off. Don't mind me. Let's remember the Septuagint, since it's being mentioned a lot. The Septuagint was a gift given to the Ptolemies from the Jews in Alexandria. So it may mention things. And remember, only the Torah was translated by the 70 elders, which is why it's considered a miraculous translation, because supposedly they all went to separate places and they all translated it and came up with the same translation into Greek. But that was only the Torah. The prophets are translated separately, and there may be mentions of extra things to help the Greeks understand what it would have meant to the Jews when they read things like when it says, when you come to worship before him. So they may have included in Jerusalem, because a Jew would have said, well, obviously he's at the temple, so you don't have to tell me it's in Jerusalem because he's where the temple is. But to a Greek, they might not have understood that means at Jerusalem, because that's where the temple is. So sometimes you may see extra tidbits, particularly in the prophets, not in the Torah, but in the prophets and stuff, that may just be there to help the Greeks who it was targeted towards. Because again, it was given as a gift to the Greek kings, to the Ptolemies, who were always good to the Jews who ruled over Egypt. In fact, Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemean Egyptian queens. She was actually Greek from her great-great-great-grandfather, I think, Ptolemy. who was one of Alexander the Great's generals.
Wow. I learn something new every day. Wow. I never knew that. So I definitely see more of that, not just in the prophets. Though I've seen it in Solomon's books, where it seems like stuff is left out in the Masoretic text and kind of connects to the New Testament a little bit more. But anyway, I digress. Let's see here. Where are we at? Let's see here. What happened?
You're next.
See,
I read Colossians, so you.
Yeah, I got, let's see, we got, I think Ray just raised his hand again. Go ahead, Ray. Or,
Oh, no, sorry. That's just still up from before, brother. Sorry.
okay, no problem.
No, I read Hebrews 4:9. So
Yeah.
one after that.
Yeah, I'm the one after that. Yep. So I'm going to now read for the audience Revelations 1:10. We're going to see how this has been misunderstood and mistranslated on purpose to promote Sunday keeping here. If you have access to it, I would definitely recommend the Restored Name King James. They fix a lot of the 1611's mistakes, including this one. I was in the Spirit on the day of so they fix where in the King James it says the Lord's Day, and the purpose of why that was mistranslated, obviously, if you're Christian, you go to church, your pastor teaches you, well, we keep the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. You know, that's our Sabbath. That's what in mainstream Christianity they call the quote-unquote Christian Sabbath. So this was done on purpose to make people think it's okay to basically keep Sunday worship and to promote the lie that Yahusha rose on the first day of the week. So that was purposely done. And I don't think there's need for any further elaboration on that. That's pretty much self-explanatory, that particular verse. All right, so I'll do the next one here, as I have here. So I have Colossians 2:14. This is another big one, especially used in Christian doctrine to get people to believe that the law is done away with. The Torah has been nailed to the stake, to the tree, you know. So this is where it gets weird, because it will say in the Greek here, it will say, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us. Ordinances, the only problem with the word ordinances here is that ordinances can mean many things. It can mean, dogmas, like it says in the original Greek, but that same Greek word in the Septuagint, ordinances, can also mean the commandments. And this is where it gets weird. So I usually like the way the Aramaic translated this correctly. In my opinion, I think they translated it a lot more correctly than the Greek New Testament here. It says, he has blotted out by his authority the bill of our debts, which was adverse to us, and took it from the midst and nailed it to his stake, his tree. So basically, he took our sins, the bill of our debts. Every time we transgress against the Father, think about sin like a credit card. It keeps adding up. So, every time you sin, you think, okay, well, nothing's going to happen to me. There's a record that's going to be against you every time you sin. So that's what I believe this is referring to, the bill of our debts. Our sins were taken to the stake. I see Ray has his hand up, so let me unmute him.
I've had some thoughts on this one too at different times. One, it could be, you recall Romans 1, Paul says, I, Paul, a doulos slave of Christ. So he's a doulos slave. Same slave that would have been in the Hebrew world, where after 7 years of servitude, you had the opportunity to join the household of your master. This could be a public declaration that he is buying you by buying your debts, which is to say, he's paid your debts and publicly posted that he's the one paying them, so you belong to him now, in which case it doesn't mean so much that you are forgiven of the debt, but it means that you now have someone who is in possession of you because of that debt, which means that they have saddled themselves with paying it because they have taken on the responsibility of running your life. And then it could
the all in the ear.
Exactly. And then it could also mean, and this is something else that I thought was pretty strange, is when it talks about nailing it to the cross. Well, we are told to take up our cross and die daily. We're told that basically our home is now the cross, because we have to die. We have to kill our flesh daily on the cross. And we have been instructed to put the law on the doorpost of our home. So it could even be a reference to saying that he's nailed it there as a declaration that this is the law of this home, and that this home is now the cross, which is to say that that is where we dwell now. Even though, of course, we should do it on our real home. But it could be a metaphor to simply say that now that we live on the cross daily, we should go ahead and put the law on it, because it's now our home, and that is the doorpost of our home. Or it could be and I understand that that there was a public declaration that took place in the Roman world where you would nail up a debt or something like that to a post in public, so that everyone in the public would know. Like, for instance, if you have a debt or you're seeking a lien on somebody, you have to publish it in the paper to let everybody know that somebody owes you money, or that you have a piece of property that somebody has abandoned. That you're notifying everyone that, hey, tell the guy to come get his stuff, because I'm going to have to get rid of it. That's kind of woven into our legal system from the Roman world. And I'm not sure which it is. That's just, those are two things that I have personally thought about.
Interesting take on that. Yeah, it's definitely food for thought. Yeah, at this point, I think it's actually referring to our debts. All right, I'm pretty convinced that it's referring to our actual transgressions, and that he's basically given us a clean slate. That's kind of how I interpret that. He's given us a clean slate. He's allowing us to come to the Father by giving us, on Judgment Day, we'll have his clean record. He will, whether our sins are blotted out or not, they are going to be blotted out. The Father says it, in Isaiah and all that. So, yeah, it's definitely food for thought, what you brought up, Ray. Let me see. I think, did you want to say anything else or no? So I had a notification or something.
Consider the role of the king in this scenario. Originally, the Israelite people were meant to all be kings, and for some to be priests. The eldest brother was to be the priest, and every other man was to be a king on the land. When they declared that they wanted a king, when they basically demanded that they be given a king, and they chose Saul, who was head and shoulders taller than every other man in Israel, Samuel warned them of what the dire consequences of putting a human king on the throne would be, which first and foremost is that he would take the first of everything that they had. So it also goes to consider that when you put a king between you and God, that king actually becomes responsible for you, because you are his slave. By default, you are not a king. He is a king. You are a slave, because he can do as he sees fit with you. You have bonded yourself into slavery to this person who has become your king. So this may also be a reference of saying, look, you guys haven't really been responsible for what you've been doing for a long time. It's always been the king, since you've had a king who's I mean, when the prophet came, he came to the king of Israel. He didn't come to a farmer in the field. He came to the king and said, "This is the problem. This is what I want fixed. It's your job to fix it." And that wasn't how it was supposed to be, but it is what Israel demanded. And God did give them what they asked for in the form of a king. So it may actually just be a carryover from all the way back then, where Yeshua is just basically saying, "Look, I'm your king. I am responsible for you. I am responsible for your debt. You are my servant. You work for me. I tell you what to do. I'll take care of the mistakes that you make, and I will bear that burden because I have taken the burden of liability." And that's the price of sovereignty, is liability. Like, for instance, we drive cars and we buy insurance. The government says you must have insurance. You must have liability insurance because we cannot bear the liability of what would happen if we actually crashed a car and killed a person or maimed a person or just destroyed property. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage, the kind of stuff that mostly no person could ever pay. So you're forced to buy insurance because you really can't handle the responsibility of liability, which is why you license your vehicle and you get a tag, and why you buy insurance. That's
It gets
you are not a sovereign.
it gets worse than that. They firmly believe that the state owns us. I ran across this several times personally, where I was staying in Gainesville, Georgia. The zoning people came by, which is under treaty from the United Nations, from the Pope. They said, "Oh, we can't allow you to sleep here because we can't be responsible for you if the place caught on fire." They believe they own us. And that's why all this other stuff comes through. They won't tell you this, but you look up the treaties through the UN, and that's where it comes from.
Well, and that is the point, is that there is no sovereignty for an individual person who is under the authority of something else. Because if you're under anything else's authority, then you are not sovereign. So
Exactly.
that's the idea. So as soon as they put a king between them and God, they lost the sovereignty they had and exchanged it for slavery, which gave them what they thought was security, but in fact was not.
And through security, we are slaves.
Exactly. But that is what Yeshua is pushing, in my opinion, forward here, is he's saying, "Listen, I'm the king. I'm responsible for you. I pay your debts. You just worry about what I want you to do. And you live according to the rules of my house," which, of course, the rules of his house are going to be the rules of his father's house. I mean, obviously. And that's something I try to teach people, too, is if you're going to be his servant, you have to abide by the rules of his house. Or otherwise, he might just decide to throw you out of his house, because you can't be a rebel and be a slave at the same time. You can be one or the other.
Well put.
Well said. Yeah, definitely. I agree there. So let's now we went on a tiny bit of a rabbit trail, but it's all right.
Actually, yours that's coming up goes right in where we're talking here.
Yeah. So I believe Shoshana, you're actually next. I read
Okay, you read Colossians 2:14,
Yep.
and I'm Colossians 2:16 and 17. So here goes. "Let no one therefore judge you in eating or in drinking or in respect of a festival or a new moon or Shabbatot, which are a shadow of what is to come, except the body of Hamashiach." He's the only one. In other words, the body of Hamashiach is the only ones who are allowed to judge us. is what this is saying.
He is our rabbi, period.
He is the only rabbi. That no other man be called rabbi, he says, for he is our rabbi.
Yeah. And just for anyone that's wondering why we brought up this, because in older Bibles, it will have that phrase, but the body is of Messiah, which just doesn't make any sense. They kind of like reworded it like backwards. And they'll misinterpret verse 16 to make you think that don't let anyone judge you for not keeping these days. So they misinterpret it also. It's a big thing Christianity says, don't let people judge you for not keeping new moons and Sabbaths. Those are just shadows. They're already done with. And so that's the type of mentality behind that type. They try to interpret it in a way where it's a loophole that they don't have to keep the appointed times of the Father. So I just wanted to explain that why Shoshana just read that verse and why we included it in this study. Okay, here we go. Brother Tobiah, I believe you're next. Brother Tobiah is going to be reading a couple scriptures here that show the Greek word Sabbaton, which is commonly mistranslated as first day of the week in various places in the New Testament. And he will be reading from a couple of these cross references we have here. First one's Matthew 28:1, but before he starts, hold on. I think we have Ray wanting to add something here. Go ahead, Ray.
Now, when we establish a way to make sure that it doesn't have Mia in it, because Mia Sabbaton would be Sabbath 1, because when they would count the days, they would count Sabbath, and then Sabbath 1, Sabbath 2, Sabbath 3, Sabbath 4, Sabbath 5, Sabbath 6, and then Sabbath again. Which is why whenever I try to explain to people when they're like, but the Lord's Day is Sunday, I'm like, if anything, the Lord's Day is the Bikurim. If you want to go by when he resurrected on the Feast of First Fruits. If you want to celebrate the Lord's Day, then call it the Feast of First Fruits, because that's what it is. That's why I try to explain that, folks. Yeah, Sabbaton does mean Sabbath plus 1. So if you see that it would be the first day of the week.
Okay.
There's another day called the Lord's Day, which is the actual day of Yahuwah, which is a day of destruction when it comes to the wicked out.
The terrible day of the Lord would be that one.
Yeah.
As it's thinking.
Yeah. The day of his wrath that's mentioned all over the prophets, Isaiah, I think in Ezekiel, in certain places. And so, yeah, that the day of Yahuwah is actually the day of his wrath.
Malachi.
Malachi talks about it. Pretty much all the prophets have at least a verse here or there where it's talking about it. So
Joel has a lot.
So can I go on with this?
Yeah.
First day of the week thing. Thank you for your opinion, Ray. I'm going to run through this here with everybody can form their own opinion on. Well, I'll present something here. Can I share a screen or try to share a screen here, Brother Doug?
Go ahead.
And I want to take us a look at the word Sabbaton is the reason why. Let me see here if I can get on a share screen. Okay. So the questionable verses that we're talking about here are going to be first day of the week references. I think it's pretty apparent that falsely represented this in the text. And oh, if I can spell it correctly. Okay, so the references here are going to be in Matthew 28:1, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn on the first day of the week, where Miriam the Magdalene and the other Miriam came to see the tomb. Okay, now the ISR, Institute for Scripture Research, makes a notation about this. We're going to go over this right quick, but before we do, we'll go through the list of them. Mark 16:2, and very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. Mark 16:9, having risen early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Miriam from Magdala, who had cast out 7 demons. Matthew 24:1, and on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. If you look into the preparation of those spices and all the references, it's pretty interesting because it shows the high Sabbath and the regular Sabbath and everything. John 21, and on the first day of the week, Miriam from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone had been removed from the tomb. John 20:19, when therefore it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors were shut, when the taught ones met, for fear of the Yehudim, came and stood in the midst and said, peace be unto you. Acts 20:7, and on the first day of the week, the taught ones having gathered together to break bread, Shaul intended to depart on the next day, was reasoning with them, and was extending in the word until midnight. Now, these references are Sabbaton, and I'll show you that here in the interlineary. But like right here, you can see clearly, on the first day of the week, they gathered together to break bread and intended to part on the next day. I mean, it's clearly insinuating that they're not going to depart on their journey on the Sabbath. They're parting on the next day. 1 Corinthians 16:2 is the last reference. On the first day of the week, let each one of you set aside, storing up what has prospered him, so there are no collections. We're going to take a look at this in the Strong's word Sabbaton, because that's the word that's here in all these scriptures. My screen catches up to us. I'm using Blue Letter Bible. I don't necessarily care how they like to leave out some words every now and then, but they got a good reference check on this word. The Greek word Sabbaton. Okay. Strong's 45:21. We're going to see that this word comes up in the King James 68 times. And 37 of those times they translated it as Sabbath day. 22 of those times they translated it as Sabbath. And 9 times they translated it as, right here it says week. Actually, they translated it as first day of the week, every one of those 9 times. Okay? And if we look through the results of all of those 68 times, we will find every one of the verses that we just read through just a minute ago about first day of the week, which begins in Matthew 28:1. And this is the notation on the ISR. This is what they reference that this is. They say, in the notation, they say that the explanatory notes, the first day of the week, excuse me, noisy here. The underlying Greek text is miaton sabbaton, which literally translated means one of the Sabbaths, but is traditionally rendered as first day of the week. The term first day of the week is literally translated as, and I'm going to butcher this Greek, prote herma tis hermadata, which in Greek nowhere appears in the New Testament. Nowhere in the New Testament does the actual Greek phrase first day of the week actually appear to be written in the text. Where they give us the term first day of the week in the Greek in the text actually comes from the little translation of miaton sabbaton. Now, a lot of us don't know Greek, but it doesn't take much to know that sabbaton is referencing the Sabbath day. And when we look at these references in Matthew 28:1, it says, in the end of the Sabbath, which is 45:21. They translate that as early on the first day. Let's see where to go. Yeah. Okay, they say the end of the Sabbath, 45:21, as it began to be dawn toward the first day of the week. That's the same word, Sabbath, Sabbaton. Sabbaton's in Matthew 28:1 twice. But these lying pens of the scribes translated it to us the first time as Sabbath, but the second reference they translated to us as first day of the week in this very same verse, when Sabbaton is in there twice. Mark 16:2. The morning on the first day of the week, there's G 45:21, the first day of the week, Sabbaton. Mark 16:9, as he was risen on the first day of the week, 45:21 is Sabbaton. Luke 24:1, now on the first day of the week, that actually says Sabbaton, early in the morning on the Sabbaton. John 20 verse 1, the first day of the week, Greek 45:21, Sabbaton, came Mary Magdalene early. Acts 27, and on the first day of the week, G 45:21, Sabbaton. Acts 20 verse 7, first day of the week, Sabbaton. 1 Corinthians 16:2 is the last reference. First day of the week, Sabbaton. Now, this may be my opinion. I would encourage everybody to check this out because there's a lot of people twisting up when the Sabbath begins and ends, and a lot of people say there's no such thing as a Sabbath night. So they're trying to get everybody to stop observing Sabbath from sunset to sunset. I would interject to say that there is a such thing, and there is a reference to it in the scriptures as a Sabbath night. I believe Matthew 28:1 references Sabbaton twice, because I believe that the word in the Greek, right before the very first reference of Sabbath, that they translate it as end of the Sabbath, it's actually translated as the evening or the even in other places in the scripture. I think it's eros or eros in Greek. I might have that word wrong, but you can look it up in Matthew 28:1. The Greek word, look at the other translations of it, where that's the only place they translate that word as end of the Sabbath. They translate it as end of the Sabbath. When other places they translate that very word in the Greek as the evening or even of the Sabbath. So I believe it's saying at the evening, after the evening of the Sabbath, during the greater light of the Sabbath. That's why it mentions the Sabbaton twice in Matthew 28:1, because it does reference an evening time Sabbath and a daytime Sabbath. But it's due to them twisting the word Sabbaton to allude to the first day of the week, the vulnerable day of the sun, like our brother Dennis and sister Shauna and everybody was talking about earlier, that they have an agenda to give esteem to the wrong day, to the day they want to esteem and take away from the esteem of our Father's day. And so I encourage everybody to look that word up. It's pretty plain. It's right in there. The Sefer translates this correctly. All these references, every one of them, they give a correct translation as on the Sabbath day. And there's one other translation that somebody, a brother or sister, came across that I don't remember. My memory eludes me to who it was. But other than that, the ISR, the Institute for Scripture Research, makes a footnote about that first day of the week clause everywhere that it is mentioned, but they leave it to be translated as it is traditionally translated as first day of the week. So that's the fullness of what I have information on this falsely translated text about the Messiah being risen on the vulnerable day of the sun. I don't think he was still in the grave. I think it makes perfect sense that our Father freed him from the grave on the Sabbath day, that he was resurrected on the Sabbath day.
The twisted wit.
Yeah. Let me switch off.
So, Tobiah, did you say that one of those words you thought was eros? I believe that word means love in Greek. It's one of the
Okay,
words.
well, let me pull it up here right quick. Let's go to it real quick because I can pull that up.
Eros is sensual love.
I'll show you it. That word we're talking about, just so we can, so I can clarify what word that is from my memory, and so everybody else can see what we're talking about. So, we can interlineary Matthew 28:1, and I'm at Blue Letter Bible here, and interlineary. It'll give it to me.
I think it's evening, right? Eric?
So yeah, Matthew 28:1. The word, if my screen's coming through, It says diopes sabaton. Diopes. Okay, Greek 1161, Greek 3796. And I think it's 3796. Let's find out that one that's yeah. Okay, so 3796 that opes, which claim on Blue Letter Bible, they claim the opes word wasn't translated as any word. But if you look at the opes, the Greek word opes that comes right before sabaton, they give it 3 uses in the scriptures. And all three, one of those uses is end, and this is the place they use it as end in Matthew 28:1. The other 2 references is even and at even. It's talking about evening or at even, at dusk, at the setting of the sun, the time of evening. You know, the setting of sun, the time of even, or time of evening.
My bad. I thought you said eros earlier.
I did. It ain't your bad. That was my bad. I did say eros because I wasn't remembering the word properly. But the word is right here is opes 3796, and in Matthew 28:1, that is the very Greek word that comes right before sabaton. That according to Blue Letter Bible, the phrase "in the end" they got out of the word di. Greek 1161, the word oops or opes, they didn't even translate according to them, even though they did in the previous phrase. But the way they do their phrasing here is not proper, in my opinion. But anyway, it says de opes sabaton, which means
I don't know. I don't even know how they even pronounced it like that, but that's okay. I see how they wrote it in the Greek. I appreciate you bringing that up, Tobias.
Right on. So that's what I have. I mean, for that word sabaton is the first day of the week. I know, Ray, what you're talking about with Mia, and it's my understanding that Mia means one of the Sabbaths or on one of, or that word Mia is used a lot of times. It doesn't necessarily mean the day after the Sabbath. I really don't believe that our Father left his son in the grave of his 3 days on the Sabbath day. It makes perfect sense to me that he was freed from the grave on the Sabbath day, and that the wicked ones are esteeming the day of the sun incorrectly here, because they translate Sabbaton 68 times, and all of them but 9 they translate as Sabbath. Even in that same verse, they translate the word inconsistently, purposely.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely, I agree with that, Brother Tobiah. So let's continue here. I have something I want to read here. Let's continue the study here. Ephesians 2:8. This is a little tricky one, because just as Sabaton, they like to translate sozo a certain way to promote that as soon as you believe in the Messiah, basically, you're automatically saved. So a lot of the times, even though it's the same Greek word sozo, you'll see basically used in Matthew 24 when Yahushua says, "He who endures to the end shall be saved." You'll always see, most of the time, it will be in what's the correct word I'm looking for? Usually it's in a future tense, this Greek word. Usually it's being used in a future tense, to be saved, shall be. If you look it up, it's G4982. The literal third definition here, to save, does not have a past tense, okay? So the translator on purpose added a D here. Why? Because they want you to believe that as soon as you accept the Messiah as your Savior, and he died for you and rose again, that's all you have to do to be saved, is believe that he did that. No action required, no commitment. You can keep living, a horrible, sinful lifestyle, but because he died and rose again, you're automatically saved You don't have to repent or anything. So that's why I believe there was an agenda with this, with it saying saved instead of to save or will be saved would have been more correct in my opinion. So I see Ray has his hand up.
Well, here we go again with the nebulous, meaningless language. Saved from what? From getting an out when you're sliding into the base? Saved from losing my game I was playing? What am I being saved from? See, that's the question. What is sozo? Look up the definition of sozo. To be saved from what? From the enemies of Israel. Because what God is saving you from is the punishments that he brings on Israel for their disobedience. And what are the punishments? The beasts of the field, the sword, the plague, and the famine. That is what you're being saved from. The sword, the plague, and the famine. This has nothing to do with heaven. It has nothing to do with hell. It has everything to do with exactly what it had to do with when people were obedient in the Old Testament. Because if you walk contrary to God, eventually you will eat your own children. That is what you're being saved from. You will never have to do that because you are being obedient to it. That is what you are being saved from. But of course, we've turned it into, we all got to go get saved. Jesus is coming. We all need to get saved. From what? From the sword, the famine, and the plague. Because that is what God does to those who walk contrary to him. He brings the beasts of the field, which is the kingdoms of the earth, and he feeds you to them. He brought Nebuchadnezzar into Jerusalem because of the sin of the king. And Jeremiah told them it was coming. And he told them what they had to do to stop it. And they set the slaves free. And as soon as they set them free, they enslaved them again. And then here comes Nebuchadnezzar taking them into slavery. Because that's what he does. It's the sword, the famine, and pestilence. That is what he does. We want to be saved from those things.
I agree with that 100%. I can't tell you how many times I've mentioned that to people, to Christians that say they've been saved. I say, saved? Saved from what? They don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason I brought this up is because just by one little letter, it changes from past tense, from future to past tense. That's the reason I brought this scripture up. So basically, they translate it a certain way to make you think that you don't have to wait for Yahusha to return. You know, basically you make your altar call or whatever you want to call it, and you're already saved from the lake of fire. Instead of what Yahusha says in Matthew 24, when he says, he who endures to the end shall be saved. So there's the future tense I was talking about. So this, I believe that basically what he's talking about, shall be saved, meaning that you will be saved when he returns if you're waiting for him and doing what he asks you to do, and you're actually walking in him and not giving in to the lust of the flesh. You will be saved from the Father's wrath, as it says in other scriptures in the New Testament. It's because of the Son that we don't get destroyed by the Father's wrath and don't go into the lake of fire because of what Yahusha did. So unfortunately, Christianity has turned that into a lawless message that you can just keep on sinning and you won't go into the lake of fire, because according to them, Romans 8:1 only has half a verse. And so all these scriptures we're bringing up, it's for a purpose. This study is for a purpose. It's for a purpose to show that there's another Basorah that has been preached. There's a false Basorah that has been preached that, you know, basically that you're saved immediately from the lake of fire. instead of you actually have to, the truth is you actually have to endure to the end to his return. And that's a huge difference, in my opinion. Anyway, I see Ray has his hand up. So I want to unmute him, and I think after him, I think John wanted to say something also.
I got it. Revelation 19:20. And the beast was taken with him, the false prophet, that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of burning with brimstone. Revelation 20:10. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake with fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever. And then death and Hades were cast in, and this is the second death. And anyone found not written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. But as for the cowardly and the faithless, the detestable, and as for murderers, sexual immorals, sorcerers, blah, 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 all the liars, their portion of the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. But I'd like to point out that that brimstone is a touchstone, which is used to test the purity of gold. So this lake of fire is actually the smelting pit to test gold. And the reason that these guys are cast into it is because they don't have any gold. They don't have anything that they've done for God. They don't contain any gold, silver, precious stones. There's nothing in them that's worth retaining for the world to come. So they're being removed so that they're no longer part. This is why it says that death itself is thrown in, because there'll be no more death after this cleansing has occurred, when we'll be able to have these bodies that cannot know corruption, where we'll neither be married nor given in marriage, and we'll be this next level of existence, whatever it may be, or maybe back like it was supposed to be at the beginning. But that's what the lake of fire is going to do. It's a purification process, not a tormentation process, except of course for the devil and the false prophet, because I guess that's all they're good for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I never thought of it that way. Let me unmute Brother John. I think he wanted to say something. Let's see here.
All right. So let me lower my hand as well. All right. So when you were reading Ephesians 2:8, and you're reading particularly the word, let me see, 2:8. You're reading the word sozo, right? It's actually two words that are actually put together. Sozo menoi, right? Which together, right, is having, actually all together, it's actually mean having been saved, right? But having been saved, you have to read the whole text, right? You just can't be just saying like one word. Well, they're saying saved in the past tense, right? You have to read the whole passage. Like when you're reading scripture, you should read that verse that you're reading, right? Not just the particular word that you're trying to point out, but the verse before it and the verse after it. But let me just read the verse 8 and verse 9, right? And it's in no particular version, but it says, by that favor, indeed, you have been saved through the faith, and this is not from you, it is God's gift. The word actually is theos gift. Not from works, so that no one may boast. Okay, so it's through Father's gifts that we find this favor. And I can see where somebody might try to use this to say, well, look at there, we don't have to do anything. And you're right. People can take that and twist it, but it's not because it was anything due to a past tense deal or anything like that. It was because they're just taken out of context. It has nothing to do with the fact that the word saved is past tense, though. Do I make any sense?
Yeah.
More like an artifact of English that we worry about the past versus the present progressive
And could I ask one more thing, Doug? If anybody in their spare time can find me a picture of a verse that we were looking at earlier, which I think was Romans 8:1. I think if you got a picture of that on from a manuscript, rather than from somebody's copy of Septuagint or some other version. Right? I'd rather see a picture of a manuscript on that particular verse, if anybody can find it.
Okay. That might be hard to find. I don't know, like an actual picture of a manuscript.
Yeah, I got like 500 of them.
Yeah. The only thing I have is the translations that some of them have the whole verse and some of them don't. And I just know from memory which translation uses what New Testament manuscript. And I noticed most of them that have the Textus Receptus have the whole verse, which the King James uses. And then there's other manuscripts, like my mom has an NIV Bible that literally says in her study Bible.
Well, what you're saying is some of the manuscripts that have the whole text.
Yeah.
Right? But then again, I'm not saying this for a fact, but you could be reading a manuscript that has added text.
Yeah. I would definitely doubt that's been added, especially knowing the character of the Father from the Tanakh. I would definitely doubt that's been added. It's more believable that half of the verse has been taken out in certain manuscripts for a purpose. That's just my opinion.
I don't doubt that either. It could go either way.
Well, here we need to discuss what the received text is. The Textus Receptus. There's like 1,500 or more copies found throughout the ancient world and through the Byzantine Church that the Greek Textus Receptus comes from. The Textus Vaticanus, or the Vulgate, is the Roman Catholic work, and Westcott and Hort did their NIV from a text that was a Vatican text that did not contain some of those verses that are missing from the NIV. It's because their text just didn't contain them. And there was only one of those. So it's amazing how many Bible translations use that Westcott and Hort text when there's literally only one copy of it that's ever been found, while the received text is 1,500 plus. In fact, I don't even know a Bible besides the King James that uses the received text. I think the vast majority of them use the Westcott and Hort text.
Yeah, the restored name, I think for the most part, the restored name scriptures pretty much don't deviate from the Textus Receptus from what I see on my eSword anyway. The ones that are really, they kind of go to the Westcott, or like the modern English Bibles like the ASV, ISV, they go to the Westcott. The ESV, NLT, like the main modernized, popularized versions, the NIV. But surprisingly enough, if you look at the restored name scriptures, they actually do, for the most part, go to the Textus Receptus for the most part. I'm not too sure in Paul's letters. I would have to test it, but I know for the most part, in Romans 8:1, I have not seen it where who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit has been missing in any of the restored scriptures. So for the most part, they do stay to that, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Well, to the shame of some of these Bible quote-unquote translators, sometimes they're just finding new words because their Bible version has to be 4% different than every other Bible version for them to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, a lot of them are just reading the King James or reading the NIV and finding other English words that are similar to words in there and getting a 4% different Bible. In fact, there was a guy on Facebook who published a Yabba Dabba Doo Bible on Lulo.com, where literally he just changed everywhere that Yod He Vav He was written, and he changed it to Yabba Dabba Doo, and he was able to publish it.
Yabba Dabba Doo sounds too much like Yalda Boloff.
Hey, and the funny thing about that is that is in the Gospel of Judas. Yaldabaoth. That's some of that Egyptian.
Yeah, I personally don't look into those quote unquote Nag Hammadi books at all. I don't trust them. I don't trust the quote unquote Gnostic Basorahs. I don't want to mess with them. That's just my personal conviction. They're weird.
People like a good mythos. I mean, that's where Lovecraft got all his mythos from.
Oh boy. All
Yeah,
right.
they have to change it. They have to change it so they can copyright it as their own.
Correct. Exactly. It has to be 4% different than any other Bible. So some of these Bibles, they just that's what they do. That's how they make their money.
How can they do that? How can they take the word of the Creator and change it to their own word? Because that's part of the world.
Well, they'll change a word like believe to, I don't know, what would be a different word for belief? Faith, to experienced faith. They changed believe to experienced faith and acted upon it. And boom, now you've got 1% different. Do that 4 or 5 more times and you've got 4% different. You're ready to go.
It's their version, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Brand new version.
All right. So anyway.
I think that is very sinful to do that because Scripture says not to sell the truth. It says buy the truth and sell it not. And therefore it should be given freely. No one has the right to sell Yahuwah's word.
And remember, only the King James is given freely. That's the point. Only the King James is given freely. The royal family allows anyone to publish it. Anyone you don't have to pay any royalties or any rights. You can publish the King James Bible. Any other Bible version, you have to pay royalties to publish.
Yes.
Interesting.
Some of the prices they ask for these Bibles are ludicrous.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I'm glad the Sefer, I can actually use it on the eSword for free. I don't ever have to buy it. I would never buy it.
Yeah, perhaps that's one reason why they wanted to do away with Paul's writings. Of course, one of the things he says, finish the race. And that's what we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And, they don't like that. Is that an oops? An oops is as big a word as if.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, so the next one I wanted to read here was Matthew 22:40, how this can be misinterpreted. And I've heard different interpretations through in the past from family members and stuff like that, try to say, well, the whole law hangs on these 2 commandments. So, you really only have to pay attention to, love your neighbor as yourself and love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart, mind, spirit, and strength. So what they'll try to say is those are the only 2 commandments you have to observe by themselves. And so I just find it really interesting. The Aramaic makes it even stronger. I mean, this you can still get that you need to observe the whole Torah because it says it hangs on these 2 commandments, hang all the law and the prophets, meaning that basically all the law and the prophets depend or are connected to these great 2 commandments, not that you subtract the rest of the law. But I really like how the Aramaic says, on these 2 commandments depend all the written law and the prophets. So meaning that basically these are the 2 greatest, so the rest of the Torah depends on these 2 great commandments. So it's saying it's not that you separate it or you just keep the 2 commandments by themselves, the 2 greatest commandments by themselves. I think Ray has his hand up. Let me unmute him. Oh, okay, you already did.
this ties back to the famous story of Rabbi Hillel and one of the, I think it was a general from, I think it was a Babylonian general. He may have come from a different province, may have been a Roman, but he came to Rabbi Hillel and he says, if you can explain to me the Torah while standing on one leg, I will learn your religion. And Hillel stood on one leg and said, don't do to anyone what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Everything else is an expansion on this, on love God. And that's what Christ is reiterating here. The Ten Commandments can be divided into 5 and 5, and they correspond to that. 5 are what are the appropriate way to love God. 5 are the appropriate way to love other people. And the 5 that have to do with loving other people, you don't want to you wouldn't do to somebody else what you wouldn't want done to you. And that is what those laws are based on. Obviously, you don't kill anybody. You wouldn't want them to kill you. You don't have sex with their wives because you wouldn't want them to do that to you. You don't steal from them because you wouldn't want them to do that to you. You don't, lie in court against them because you wouldn't want them to do that to you. And that's the idea. And on the other side, God tells you what he expects when you're giving him your love, and there's him first, no idols, honor his Sabbath, etc. That's why he said that, because yes, the law is love God and love your neighbor. Here's how you do it. Everything expands on those ideas.
The old golden rule.
Exactly. He who has the gold makes the rule.
Exactly.
Okay, so John, are you able to read Mark chapter 7, verse 19?
Yes, I can read that.
Okay.
But I think your emphasis is in the part that is in quotations.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will read the quotation part, and then I will read in a better version after that.
Okay.
Okay. Because this does not go into his heart, but into his stomach, and is eliminated. And in quotations, thus he declared all foods clean. Okay. And then a better version goes that all because it enters not into the heart, but goes into the belly and passes and goes into the privy and goes out cleaning all the foods. But it doesn't have quotations in that one.
Yeah, the King James does not, isn't brave enough to put that in there, but the NIV sure is.
Yeah.
I think most people know. I think most people know when something's in quotations like that it's not actually scripture.
Yeah. They admit it. They admit it in the study Bible. My mother actually has a study Bible way back when she used to go to Christian church, and she still has it on her physically. And I showed it to her in the footnotes. It's right on the bottom of the page of footnotes. Doesn't appear in the Greek. They're outright telling you that they added it in. So that was Mark 7:19. So any decent translation that's for the viewers and listeners listening and viewing this study here, if you have a decent Bible, even like a decent modern English translation, it should not have in quotations by this he made all foods clean. That has been added in by a translator to promote the idea that you can eat pork, shrimp, whatever. The Messiah made all animals clean, which would go totally against even what Paul taught. And that will be one of our last cross references in 1 Timothy 4 once we get there. We'll show you that's.
Can I throw a question at you?
Yep.
Okay, so are we as Israelites allowed to sell unclean foods to Gentile people?
I would have to check back at the Torah. I honestly forget about that one. I know that roadkill supposedly you can give to a Gentile, I think.
Right. Now isn't the same law apply to the Gentiles as to the Israelites?
Um,
And if that is so, would that be a contradiction?
if a Gentile sold to us unclean meat, you mean?
No, I mean they're under the same laws as we are, right? The Gentiles, right?
They're only under the same law if they're in Israel and trying to become a part of the people. They're not under the same law.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I almost got caught in that one.
They can eat whatever crawls upon the earth. They can eat whatever they want to. I would, but they can't.
Yeah, I agree with.
I just thought I'd throw that in there because it kind of fitted with this verse here. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
No, that's good, John. You kept me on my toes there. I almost folded if it wasn't for Ray there. Thanks, Ray, for that. I honestly, I haven't read that part honestly in the Torah in a while, so I might need a refresher in that. So, but yeah,
you might even argue that only the Levites and the priesthood had to keep that kosher law because the other fellas out there in Israel, I mean, you're only unclean for until even with some of these things, and then some of them maybe 7 days touching or eating them. So their only duty would have been to make sure they didn't make a priest become unclean and didn't show up to a festival unclean. You could even argue that they didn't worry about it, but only the priest. I mean, it is in Leviticus, and it is about making yourself ceremonially clean so that you do not bring corruption into the presence of the Most High. And if you're not going to Jerusalem and you don't work at the temple, you're not going to bring corruption into His presence. But then, of course, the Pharisees would have taught everyone that they were the temple of the living God. So everyone would have invested in not allowing themselves to become unclean. But again, that could be the teachings of the Pharisees at work and not actually, a fullness of what's in the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
They were kings and priests.
Yeah. All I know is Isaiah 66 is pretty clear to me. I ain't trying to get consumed when He comes back.
Oh,
so,
for eating mice and pig, for eating the pig and the mouse.
Yeah.
I could really drive you crazy with some questions, Doug. If you want me to try, I can do it.
No, I'm all right. I'm fine.
All right.
Thanks, though. Titus chapter 3, verse 9 is another really, really weirdly translated verse here. We got where this is where they want to point out that we should not be arguing about whether we are to keep Torah or not. This is a big one here. So Titus chapter 3, verse 9, and I'll just read from pretty much every Greek New Testament. It's going to read the same for this. It says, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are unprofitable and worthless. So a Christian will say, because they've been indoctrinated by a preacher here, they'll say, oh, well, that, it's unprofitable. There's no use to it. It's vain. It's worthless to argue about whether we should keep the law or not. And I would just like to point out, it's kind of interesting, the Aramaic version of this, what's known as the Peshitta, says instead of arguments about the law or disputes about the law, it says, but abstain from foolish debates, from tales of genealogies, from contentions, and from contests of the scribes. In my opinion, this makes a lot more sense. For there is no profit in them, and such things are worthless. Meaning you got the scribes and the Pharisees, bragging how great they are, and, who knows, basically self-exaltation, who knows more of the Torah than another person. So to me, that makes a lot more sense, and it's worthless to debate whether we are to keep the law or not. So I see Ray has his hand up.
I think we gotta put ourselves into the time period, the shoes of the people. Paul at one point said, you know, someone will say, I am of Timothy, or I am of Paul, and I am of Apollos. Everyone had their own Haggadah that they were trying. Okay, we all have a Bible, right? So we all say, I've got my Bible, I've got my 66 books, and I know what the truth is because I've got my Bible, my King James Bible. If I had a Vulgate, I'd have all the Ezras and the books of the Maccabees too, and I'd call that the truth. But you have to remember that these people didn't have the Torah. The only way they knew what the Torah was they had to go to a synagogue and hear it read from the Moses' seat. And of course the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. And what they'll do is they would read the Torah in Hebrew out loud. And if you did not speak Hebrew, then you didn't know what was said. Same way that the Latin church did with Latin. You couldn't speak Latin, you didn't know what the priest was talking about. So then what he would do is they would have a man who was called it's a word that begins with an M. And it's Alfred Edersheim talks about it repeatedly in the life and times of Jesus Messiah. But this person would then translate into the common tongue what they felt was necessary for the people to know, essentially. They would kind of give a synopsis and something to understand in the common tongue, which typically was the Aramaic, or I guess maybe in Greek in some of the more liberal synagogues. But these people, that was their only exposure to the Torah, because unless you were fabulously wealthy, you didn't have a copy of the Torah, because it took, I don't know, a herd of sheep's worth of vellum to write the scrolls on, and, you know, I don't know how many barrels of ink, you know, a lifetime supply of money for most people to even be able to afford the ink to have it scribed. Plus, you had to pay the scribe to actually create it. So they may have had access to the Septuagint, but the Septuagint was in Greek and not in Hebrew. So someone like Paul, who spoke Hebrew, who was a Pharisee of the Pharisees, would come and give these people instruction in what the Torah said. And then it was obviously the only place they were able to hear it was at their local synagogue. So, you know, that's why Peter's like, listen, you know, abstain from strangled meat. You know, don't do this, don't do that. Make sure that when you go to that synagogue, you're not showing up smelling like a Gentile. Don't show up there worshiping other gods. Don't show up there doing something that's going to get you kicked out or forbidden entrance, because you need to go and hear the Torah read, which is actually why it says the Torah is read in the synagogue. Moses is read. So when you would go to the synagogue, you would hear it, and that would be your exposure to it, but you would also receive exposure to Pharisees debating what it meant. And they would spend a lot of time, and they do this today. If you ever go and watch Yentl with Barbara Streisand, where she pretends to be a boy, she goes to the yeshiva, and you see young men having heated debates to the point of screaming at each other about what the Torah actually means and what different rabbis have said it means. And you'll have different people from different schools. At the time of Christ, there was famously in Jerusalem the school of Hillel, which was typically what Yeshua would favor. And then there was the school of Shammai, which he only seemed to favor on the issue of marriage and divorcement. He seemed to agree with Shammai, which was more conservative, varied by the letter of the law, while Hillel's interpretations tended to land on the side of mercy, because that was his job. Hillel was the president of the Sanhedrin in Babylon, and his job was to interpret the Torah in terms of the greatest mercy, while Shammai, as the vice president, his job was to interpret by the letter of the law. So he read it very strictly, while Hillel read it with a much more liberal bias. And both of them had schools, which frankly ended up in some knockdown, drag-out fights where some of them even killed each other over being and differences of opinion about what the Torah meant. So Titus is like, look, let's don't go there. Let's don't do that. We're supposed to be a family of God. We're supposed to be people coming to understand God, what He wants. You know, let's don't end up like the school of Hillel and Shammai having a knife fight and people dying because people were arguing about what the Torah actually meant. You know, just be cool, y'all. Take it easy. And, you know, you're all just kids. It's like when Paul comes to me and says, listen, you guys aren't even ready for me. I would love to feed you meat, but you're not ready for it. You're still babies. I have to feed you milk because all you can understand is the very simplest part of what is in the Torah, because you guys were not born and bred and raised in a synagogue under the tutelage of great masters like I was. So I can't sit here and explain to you the most intricate, strange mysterion. That's a Greek word, by the way, mysterion. It's where we get mystery from. I can't explain to you the mysteries or the mysterion, which is the deeper teachings of the Pharisees concerning these different laws and why they are. All I can do is just to give you the law, and you just need to obey the law. That's why when in Corinthians he went after the man, he's like, look, it's been said that you have a man among you as his father's wife. Get him out of the church. It's not an issue. It wasn't even a question to him. He's just like, get this guy out. He cannot be in this congregation. He is breaking the Torah. Get him out. I've told you not to break the Torah. And that's what the people are dealing with. I mean, these are not people with an education in the scriptures. These are people who don't know nothing except they want to know more about God. And they've got to have somebody teach them, because most of them can't read Hebrew, and maybe they can read Greek, and maybe they can get a hold of the Septuagint. But the Septuagint in many places is significantly different than what's written in the Hebrew text. So I think that's what Titus is talking about.
Well, I think the whole duty of man is to obey the commandments. That's pretty much period.
Right, but you have to know them before you can obey them. Someone has
Absolutely. Now, a nice thing about that, as compared to man's law, man will tell you ignorance of the law is no excuse. But Yahweh is different. If you don't know the law, he will not penalize you until you do know the law. That's a big difference. And it's wonderful.
In the New Testament, the servant of Candace has come to Jerusalem because he wants to experience being close to God at a festival. And he's reading the scroll of Isaiah because he's got enough money and wealth that he can afford to have the scroll. But he don't know what it's talking about. He has no idea what this stuff means. And he says, how am I supposed to understand this if no one will explain it to me? So the disciple comes to him and begins to explain to him how all of that led up to Yeshua and the crucifixion and the resurrection. And then suddenly, I had no idea. Here's water. Shouldn't I be baptized? Let me be one of these people. Let me be like you. You have taught me what I needed to know. And that's the thing is Titus, Paul, Aquila, Priscilla, all these people in the New Testament are just trying. I mean, you got to remember, Paul was on his own, having never met Yeshua, having nothing but a single vision on the road.
Yes.
I think 14 years he was out on his own, running his own ministry. He had no oversight. He had never met Peter, never met John or James until like 14 years after he had been doing it. It might have been 17 years. It's in the book of Acts. It tells how long he was doing his own thing. But I mean, literally, a decade and a half, he was out there doing what he thought was best, all on his own.
That's true.
And all he had was his teachings as a Pharisee and his understanding of what Messiah was supposed to be in accordance with what the Pharisees had taught him
Exactly.
and instructed him. So he was out there teaching people stuff that, I mean, you know, we might hear and say, well, this just sounds crazy. But frankly, I mean, his epistles, probably to Peter, James, and John, sometimes they were probably like, God, this guy sounds crazy. Even Peter said, look, man, we don't understand what Paul's talking about half the time because he's talking about stuff that don't make no sense to us. We were right
remember,
there.
too, yes, they were afraid of Paul while he was a Pharisee when he was struck down in Damascus and knew what was going on at that point. They were afraid that Paul was going after people and to kill them, even after he was converted.
Oh yeah, they thought it was a setup. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I mean, hey, he was doing his own thing. He was doing the best he could with what he had. And when it came to it later, he had gone so far. He had walked so far away from being an Orthodox Pharisee that Peter looked at him and said, you know, shouldn't we keep ourselves clean? And Paul's like, if you're gonna play the Jew, go play a Jew. I'm gonna be out here working with these people. If you want to go, if you want to pretend you're one of the Pharisees, go and pretend you're one of the clean people, and I'll go and mingle with the Gentiles. You know, I mean, really, they had some serious debates between. We read the scripture like it's some kind of uniform document of rules and laws. It's not. It's filled with debate and with questions and with opinions and with arguments between people who were vying for control of a population of people. Peter had
exactly
his own,
right.
That's
right. They were vying for control.
Yes.
And
Peter had his
that's
group,
true.
and Peter and James had a falling out. And Peter and James separated out into different groups. Peter had, I believe, Peter had the Nazarenes. No, Peter had the Ebionites, and James had the Nazarenes. And both of them were destroyed by Rome. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, they destroyed both sects that came from Peter and James. And all that remained was the weird people who Paul had proselytized in the best way that he could. That's why our Christianity is really Paulianity. I mean, it's Paul trying to explain stuff at a genius level to a bunch of people that don't know nothing until he finally.
Yes, and his words were twisted, like the twisted wick.
And
that's what happened.
And that's exactly what Peter said. He said, "Look, man, people are going to twist Paul's words and try to turn it into some kind of license for lawlessness, but that's not what it is."
Yes.
In fact, we love Paul. We don't understand him half the time because he talks about things that Pharisees talk about, and we don't know nothing about that because the only thing we ever knew was Yeshua, and he didn't. He argued with Pharisees all the time, you know.
Yes, he did.
So, anyways, I gotta let you guys go because I'm at the house. I just pulled up. I've been talking to you on the 2-hour drive, but it sure has been wonderful to chat with everybody and to share the word and opinions.
Absolutely, we've enjoyed it very much, very much.
Same here.
And I apologize for talking so much. It's just the only thing I really care about, and it's hard not to get going when I get going.
That's great.
Yeah. Sister Sadie, are you able to read right now? We're at Revelations 22:14, if you're able. Sister Sadie, you there? Okay, I think we have.
Did you unmute me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. I got to turn this one on.
Okay. I'll get Revelations 22:14 up for you. Here. Okay, so.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think I might have an echo. Let me turn this one off. Hang on. Leave this. Okay. All right, here I am. So let me, is this better? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, this one's better. Hold on, brother. Okay, so there was some footnotes I was trying to copy and paste, but it just wouldn't let me. So I am reading Revelations, and I don't know the proper name of it. If I've heard Chazu Yahoo, but that was again from where I used to come from. And so I will just say the book of Revelations as we know it, 22:14, and it says, "Blessed are those doing his commands, so that the authority shall be theirs unto."
You there? We lost you. You there, Sadie? Sadie, yes.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, I'm here.
you got cut off halfway through. Can you reread that?
Okay. Revelations 22:14. Blessed are those doing his commands, so that the authority shall be theirs unto the tree of life, and to enter through the gates unto the city.
All right. Yes. And reason we bring this up is because some of these Bibles took it upon themselves to translate Barak are those who keep his commands, and they've changed that to are those who wash their robes. And unfortunately, there's many of them that do this. The ESV does it. Let me see here. I think the God's Word one does it. Yeah, who wash their robes. The Good News Bible, who wash their robes clean. So a lot of the modern translations, again, wash their robes. So unfortunately, some of these translations have mistranslated it instead of who keep his commandments. That's how it should read. Those that do his commandments or observe his commandments or guard his commandments. So Sister Sadie just read that from Revelations 22:14. So translations such as the Tree of Life version, the ISV, the Good News Bible, the English Standard Version, and the NLT all mistranslate who keep his commandments to wash their robes, unfortunately. And that gives a wrong idea to someone reading that. And so now we're going to move on to Psalms 138, verse 2 that I will read. In the Masoretic text, I find it interesting that they kind of try to, the way this verse is put in the Masoretic text is almost like they're trying to devalue the importance of his name, almost in a way. Especially in the King James here, it says in Psalms 138, verse 2, I noticed a huge difference between the Masoretic text in this verse and the Septuagint. So I'll read the Masoretic text first, and you'll see the difference. Psalms 138, verse 2, and I'm reading from the King James here. I will worship toward your set-apart temple and praise your name for your loving kindness and for your truth, for you have magnified your word above all your name. So it's basically saying that Yahuwah's name or his authority is below his name, that his word has been magnified above his authority, his character, his actual name. And if you look at the Septuagint version of this exact verse, it actually says the opposite. I will worship toward your set-apart temple and give thanks to your name on account of your mercy and your truth. For you have magnified your set-apart name above everything. So you have the almost complete opposite. And I kind of find it interesting because a name is not just a pronunciation or, a name. A name can also, be his character, his personality, his authority. So I think that is a big difference in my opinion when looking at those two versions of Psalms 138 verse 2. Ray, do you have something to say? I see you had your hand up, or maybe it was up from before. I guess it was from before then. Never mind. All right. 1 Timothy 4:3, Sister Sadie, if you could possibly read that and conclude the study.
Okay. It
Yep.
says, 1 Timothy 4:3, out of the Scriptures, 1998, it says, forbidding to marry, to abstain from foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth.
Right. So let's dive into the problem here, where they translate meats or foods, and in our Western Greco-Roman culture, we could misinterpret this, and many people have, into believing that all meats are okay. They're all created by Yahuwah to be received. Every creature of Yahuwah is tube and nothing to be refused. You know, if you read the next verse, you can get a misinterpretation here. So what we got to look at here is, what is the original Greek word for meats? Okay, it's broma, which means, if we look at the original Greek word here in verse 3, if we look at what broma actually means, that which is eaten, food. So what Paul and the Israelites would consider food. But if you actually look into the Strong's Concordance here, it says, from the base of G977, food, literally or figuratively, especially articles allowed or forbidden by the Yahudim law. Meaning that they would either be forbidden or allowed by the law. Now, obviously, this verse here is talking about something that is allowed, that Yahuwah has created to be received. So food that would be basically animals that would be considered food according to Leviticus 11. So this is how this gets easily not mistranslated, but easily misinterpreted, and possibly mistranslated just by translating it as meats. You can get a wrong idea because of our westernized culture that pretty much every meat in America is eaten and considered to be food. So that's the problem. We have a westernized culture. We don't understand that Yahuwah never created every animal to be received as meat, as food. He always had clean and unclean. So, Ray, I don't know if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, the which epistle?
First Timothy.
Yeah.
1 Timothy 4:3, where it has meats in English.
I think at the time he was in Gaul. I'm not sure though, or if he was in Anatolia. But the province of Gaul is where we get the word Gaelic from, and the Gaelic religion is the Druidic religion, and it's possible that the reason he's bringing this up is because there was a strong ascetic, the ascetics, or is that ascetic? Is that the word? People, the Stoic philosophers. Paul mentioned Stoicism several times, referring to that actual mindset. Part of the Stoic philosophy is not eating animals. So, like, you don't want to, and it's kind of got a rebirth these days. With people are like, well, I've gone back to the. I mean, I'm not talking about myself, but some people are like, well, I'm doing it the right way because I've gone back to the pre-flood diet, which is the I don't eat meat, or just people who are vegans or whatever, like, oh, I don't eat meat because it's it's murder, killing animals is murder, and we don't shed blood, and et cetera, et cetera.
A lot.
And that and that may have been present at that time too, with people from the Stoic school of thought or the aesthetics school of thought, just basically saying, if we're going to be good, shouldn't we refrain from killing animals and eating them because there's no need to, because there's no temple where we could bring a sacrifice. So let's just stop with it and not do it. And that could be some of where Timothy's coming from. The best idea would be to find out where he's at when he's giving these teachings, and that'll probably tell us a lot about why he's bringing this up to this congregation that he's talking to.
Yeah, just the thought I had is probably he's warning them about a doctrine of demons, because it starts out in this chapter with the context. Some will depart from the belief, and the Spirit expressly speaks in latter times that some shall depart from the belief, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. So this chapter starts out by him warning about people that are going to start bringing you some weird doctrines that actually go against Scripture, like forbidding to marry, abstaining, like you just said, abstaining from eating meats that actually were considered lawful according to the Torah. So I think, I could be wrong, I think in my opinion that the crowd he would have been, basically he was dealing with Gnosticism. The Gnostics believed that eating meat in general was evil. It was sinful to feast. It was sinful to, basically feast on the feasts. It was sinful to do this and that, according to the Gnostics. And they were creeping into the assembly. A lot of times Paul was dealing with Gnosticism. And then you had, obviously the Galatians, I think, were going back. It's kind of hinted at that the Galatians were going back into paganism because of what he talks about. You observe times and years, I'm afraid for you. But that's a whole different topic. But basically, I believe that 1 Timothy 4 could possibly dealing with the Gnostics. And that they were telling them, you need, like you were just talking about the whole vegetarian thing. Yeah, the Gnostics believe that eating meat is evil. And that type of mindset has actually creeped into certain sects of Christianity, actually. There's certain sects, certain people in Seventh-day Adventism believe that you're going to the lake of fire if you eat meat. So that's just my thought on it, of what this...
Seventh-day Adventists are actually divided on that.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said certain sects in Seventh-day Adventism, not all of them. But there are certain people that I've heard say it, that, they believe that they need to go back to the original Garden of Eden diet.
Diet of man, yeah.
Yeah, and all that. So
Earth-bearing plant.
I think you can actually find these carried on now in the Catholic Church somewhat. Well, at least one of these doctrine of demons, the forbidding to marry. So
yeah,
you can actually find this in other religions, like these two main doctrine of demons he's talking about in verse 3 in modern religion. Even some other religions, they believe it's evil to kill animals and eat meat. Other religions believe animals are sacred. They worship animals, so they don't eat them. I think Hinduism does that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So they, so this definitely has, I think, though, it started with these Gnostics creeping in, because even Jude was talking about it in the book of Jude, some men creeping unawares. So it seems like there was these Gnostic believers that claim to believe in the Messiah, because then you have the book of 1 John saying, if this is how you test the spirits. Any spirit that does not basically witness that Yahushua came in the flesh, that is of anti-Messiah. So that's another belief of the Gnostics. So I think the apostles were dealing a lot with Gnostic behavior in their day. I think that's just my opinion. That's what I think was really going on in 1 Timothy chapter 4. That's pretty much what I've noticed.
Yeah,
lot of-
I would agree with you, Doug. By the way, you need to refresh your
Yeah,
screen.
yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for reminding me to refresh my share screen, because it does that. Yeah, so this is pretty much the end of the study. I'm sorry, everyone, we went on so many rabbit trails. It's just there was certain stuff that kept popping up as we were reading. Hopefully this was a study to help you out, to understand Scripture a little bit better. Hopefully we were vessels used by the Father Yahuwah and the Son Yahusha to give you a better idea of what the true message of the Scriptures actually is, and what the true message of salvation actually is. And so thank you for joining us tonight. This is our midweek meeting that we will be doing from now on. So thank you for joining us. Shalom, and we will see you on the Sabbath, all of our subscribers and weekly viewers, listeners. Shalom.
Shalom, Lila Tov.
Leila Tov.